Welcome back, y'all. It's M. For today's video, we're going to cover the second half of Season 1 of Frieren, which is a little more on that expansion of our main characters and the different power levelings as we get to the first class Mage exam. Also, upon my researching and editing, I've realized that finding anime clips were hard as which is very different from talking about video games, which I do on my other channel. So we're readjusting a bit to show my face a little bit more, while still sprinkling in some cutscenes wherever I can find them. Also, I realized I did a cutoff of episode 14 in the previous video, so I'll add the synopsis and analysis from that episode to this video. And honestly, until we get to about episode 18, which is the start of the first class mage exam, these episodes kind of bled into each other anyway. Episodes 14 through 17, the Sign Chronicles. After reaching the next town, Fern and Stark argue after Stark fails to get a birthday present for Fern. This is basically going to be a thing that's reoccurring between the two, very much in this set of episodes, and I think it's done to, one, show that coming of age romantic tension that's developing between Fern and Stark since they're about 18 at this point, and two, compare Fern and Stark's interactions to Frieren and Himmel's interactions in the past. Sign advises Fern that someone like Stark can't be expected to remember everything, and she should treat him less harshly and be more honest with her feelings. Fern tries to apologize to Stark, but he apologized first, admitting that he wanted to pick Fern's present together with her, but was too nervous to ask her in the first place. As Stark buys a new bracelet for Fern, Frieren praises Sign for being a proper adult like Hyter. And I should note here that Hyter knew Sign when he was a kid and was kind of like his mentor, so Frieren working with Sign now kind of circles back to her relationship with Hyter. There are flashbacks through this section where Hyter even shares his stories of his adventures with Frieren to Sign and his friend. On the way to the next village, Frieren notes the bracelet Stark bought for Fern has a similar design to a ring Himmel once bought her. A flying monster suddenly attacks the wagon that they're traveling in, and while Frieren manages to kill it, the ring she was talking about is lost in all the confusion. As the party focuses on repairing the wagon, Sign notes that the design on the bracelet and ring is the mirrored lotus, which in the language of flowers symbolizes eternal love. Stark is embarrassed at finding something with such intimate connotations, but Fern doesn't seem to mind. Frieren searches for her ring, and the merchant that they were helping gives her a spell that can locate lost accessories. After Frieren recovers her ring, she recalls the time Himmel bought it for her. She picked out the ring initially, but in hindsight, it seemed that Himmel knew about its hidden meaning, and he gracefully placed it on her finger as if proposing to her. So you see how the Fern Stark and Frieren Himmel comparison comes through in this episode. So we're seeing more and more of the dynamics of Himmel and Frieren's relationship and how through Frieren's flashback she's getting a lot of more hindsight and how Himmel might have truly saw her over the course of their 10-year journey. The party arrives at another village and discovers a monster had cursed the residents to sleep. Fern, Stark, and even Frieren succumb to the curse, with only Sign being unaffected because he's a priest and therefore he has resistance to curses. Sign manages to wake Frieren up long enough for her to kill the monster, but this was actually risky because Frieren, for one, likes her sleeps, and with her just waking up, she could have easily shot Sign's eyes, missed completely, or destroyed the entire village and everyone in it, if the attack got deflected at all. However, the plan worked, and Frieren was able to kill the monster within one shot. Later, the party reached the city of Vorig, the relay point to Oishurst. A noble named Orden sees Stark and asks him if he could pose as his deceased son Wirt during an upcoming party to keep the morale among the people high. As the public was told, Wirt was alive from a recent battle and is just recovering. But he has another son, I think it's pronounced Mutt, who is younger, but who also at this point has been neglected and is kind of seen by Orden as a lost cause. Now, whether this is due to his grief or because he just doesn't like the kid isn't 100% clear. It could be a mix of both, though. Frieren initially refuses, but they're low on money, so she relents when Orden offers to pay them in gold, as well as a grimoire. Stark and eventually Fern have to learn proper etiquette before the coming party, since Fern was asked to basically be Stark/Wirt's date. They're both able to successfully play their roles at the party, and it concludes without issue. And again, there's a subtle coming-of-age cute romance vibe in the soiree dance scene between Fern and Stark. Orden then offers Stark to stay at Vorig, but Stark declines, pointing out that he couldn't replace Wirt, and Orden can't replace his own father. He also still plans on returning to Eisen because he wants to tell him about his adventures. As Frieren selects the grimoire she wants, Stark, Fern, and Sign watch Orden train his son Mutt. Frieren decides to stop by a village to visit one of her old friends, an elderly dwarf named Old Man Vol, He swore to protect the village in memory of his deceased human wife. And while he's delighted to spend the week catching up with Frieren and Stark, Frieren can tell that Old Man Vol, because he's old, is getting increasingly senile and promises to carry on his memory in the future, like she carries on the memory of Himmel, Hyder, and Eisen, even though Eisen's not dead. But the party continues towards Oysers until Sign stops at the final crossroads before the city, asking the local village if they had seen his friend nicknamed Guerrilla Warrior. The only person who remembers where Guerrilla Warrior went is the stubborn old woman who has the party complete several errands for her, with the final one being cleaning the statues of a pair of forgotten heroes. Frieren recognizes one of the statues as Croft, while Sign remembers that an identical pair of statues were what inspired him and Guerrilla Warrior to become adventurers in the first place. Sign then learns that Guerrilla Warrior traveled in a different direction from Oishurst, putting him in a dilemma on whether to follow this trail or to continue in traveling with this current party. As Sign takes his time to decide, the party stays at the village, but their departure is halted when a snowstorm falls, which keeps them in the village for an entire month. During this time, Fern gets angry at Stark again, and Sign discovers that it was because Stark accidentally grabbed her shoulder with too much strength, startling her. Sign convinces the two to make up, while also commenting that those two should just go ahead and date. I get it. After the storm subsides, he leaves the party to look for Guerrilla Warrior, while Frieren, Fern, and Stark head to Oishurst. On the way there, Fern gets sick, and they stop in a small village to treat her. While tending to Fern, Frieren reveals to Stark that she usually grabs Fern's hand when she's sick to give some emotional support, and reminisces when Himmel did the same for her when she was traveling with him. Again, we see that comparison between Fern and Stark and Frieren and Himmel play out. After Fern gets better, the party finally arrives at Oishurst in time for Frieren and Fern to take the first class mage exam. So, we finally get to the first class mage exam in which both Frieren and Fern participate, and we also get introduced to some new mages, so bring on the power level combos. We get introduced early on to a mage named Ubel, who very much gave this rebellious, mercenary, chaotic neutral, close to chaotic evil vibes on the first meeting. Ubel got approached by 3 bandits who might have been seeking retribution because Ubel had already killed multiple bandits. So Ubel was actually ready to throw blows until Croft intervened and fought them off, and they part ways after a short introduction. Fern and Frieren arrive at the Continental Mage Association place and get ready to take the exam. The exam is proctored by Senza, a pacifist, that's going to be important for the second exam, Gino, and Foch, who gauge the candidates with Senza before the first exam and announces the format of the third and final stage of the mage exam. We also have Lernen, who's a former Imperial mage and an apprentice of Syria, who we'll dive into a little bit later. Lernen actually usually conducts the third stage of the mage exam, but things are different this time around, and again, we'll get into why in a bit. For the first exam, which is to catch a Stilla, which is a type of bird, Fern and Frieren are split, with Fern teamed up with Ubel, whose specialty is copying magic through empathy and cutting, and another mage Lon, whose specialty is cloning. And Frieren teamed up with Gon, whose specialty is water manipulation, and Loine, whose specialty is ice manipulation. Gon and Loine grew up together as friends and argue like sisters for nearly the whole first exam, but they tend to actually work pretty well together despite all the bickering. So the trick in catching a Stilla is that the Stilla moves faster than sound and is super sensitive at sensing movement. The mages have about 36 hours or sunset the next day to capture the Stilla, which is why Khan and Loine's fighting starts to get so irritating. I should also mention 2 other teams of mages. There's a party of Eri, whose specialty is turning rocks into bullets, Orbel, whose specialty is binding, and Shroff, whose specialty of turning flowers into steel, and the party of Dinkin, whose main specialty is wind, but he's also an older mage with a lot of experience, Richter, whose specialty is earth magic, and Lawfin, whose specialty is stealth and speed. Fern and her party capture the Stilla pretty early on, and Frieren and her party capture the Stilla by freezing the lake while infusing smaller pools of water with mana and leaving a single pool uncontaminated in order to catch the Stilla once they get thirsty. Dinkin's party then shows up and tries to fight Frieren's party to steal the bird, while Werbel's party ambushes Fern's party to steal theirs. Both Werbel and Dinkin's parties lose, with Frieren destroying Syria's barrier in the process in order to give Khan the chance to use her water magic to defeat Richter. However, Werbel and Dinkin's parties both found ways to still catch the Stilla bird, with Werbel's using his binding magic to catch a Stilla by luck, and Dinkin's party finding a weaker party to just bully and take their bird. So there are 6 successful teams by the end of this first exam. So real quick, let's talk about Syria. At least the background we got up to this point. Flom introduced Frieren to Syria about 1,000 years ago when Syria was Flom's master. Syria offered any single spell to Frieren, but Frieren refused and said the best part of magic was the pursuit. Syria thinks Frieren lacks ambition, but Flom is convinced that Frieren will be the one to defeat the Demon King since Frieren can envision a peaceful era, unlike Flom or Syria. In other words, Syria isn't really all that impressed with Frieren's lack of bloodlust, despite her being a boss and OP with magic. Episodes 22 through 26, the second exam. So episode 22 is actually sort of a reprieve episode where Fern scolds Stark for drinking at the tavern and staying up late, and Frieren then takes Fern and Stark out to dinner to basically boost Fern's mood. There's a bit of an awkward reunion as Frieren, Fern, and Stark run into Dinkin's group as well as Ubel and Lon. Everyone decides to focus on their food, so it was basically this feeling of just shut up and eat your food. The next day at the inn, Loin and Khan give pastries to Frieren to thank her for helping them pass the first test. Frieren then flashes back to Himmel telling her that he became a hero because changing a person's life in even a small way will cause them to remember him long after he's gone. While everyone is talking, they receive the notification for the second test, but Loin and Khan are discouraged after seeing that Senza is proctoring the test since nobody has ever been able to pass her test. So we get into the second exam that Senza is proctoring, and remember, Senza is a self-proclaimed pacifist, but her exam is this labyrinth maze dungeon in which the mages are basically fighting each other's shadow. So she's a pacifist in the sense that she doesn't like the mages fighting each other, but if a clay shadow takes them out, then it's fair game. But she does provide the mages with a bottle to break to call a golem if things get a little too difficult, but if you break the bottle, you automatically fail, so it's really a last resort. Anywho, the 18 mages who are present for the second exam have to reach the bottom of the dungeon before dawn the next day, or the bottles will automatically shatter. We do get some new people, but the main mage to remember is Methode, whose main specialty is hypnosis. Everyone sort of separates because no one really trusts each other after the first mage exam, despite Dinkin trying to get everyone to work together as a team before going in. We also learn that there's a Spiegel that needs to be taken out as well in order to get to the bottom of the dungeon. So I'm gonna skip all the ins and outs of who is with who and who fought which clay shadow because it gets messy really quickly. The main thing is that Senza did accompany Frieren and Fern into the dungeon. Everyone had to fight a clay shadow and struggled, and some bottles were broken in the process. And of course, Frieren's clay shadow was about the most OP. It was actually between her and Senza, but I'm biased towards Frieren. So through the clay shadows, we get a good glimpse into everyone's power levels, or at least just how their abilities can be exploited and circumvented. So the mages decide to attack the replicas who are the best match as opposed to attacking their own shadows. Again, it's between Senza's shadow and Frieren's shadow as far as the most OP, but some other notable shadows were Methode's, Fern's, and Ubel's. So this turns into a battle of attrition with Frieren and Fern taking out Frieren's shadow as well as the Spiegel. And we learn that Frieren's main weakness is that she can't detect mana when she casts a spell, which I feel like that's gonna come back to bite her in the ass a little bit later, not in this season, but like later in the anime. In the midst of all this, we get another flashback where Flom has now passed away, and Frieren gives Syria her will, which reveals that Flom convinced the human emperor to allow humans to adopt magic. Syria remarks that this is the start of the era of humans, and eventually human mages will surpass even elves like herself and Frieren. Episodes 27 and 28, the final exam. Episode 27 starts out with Fern being pissed at Frieren because Fern's staff broke during the second exam, and Frieren told her to just get a new staff without taking the time to consider why the staff was important to Fern in the first place. Fern confides in Stark that her broken staff was actually a gift from Hyter, so it's very sentimental to her. After some hindsight, Frieren goes to Richter's shop and convinces him to repair Fern's staff. Fern discovers her repaired staff after she and Stark return to the inn, and she flashes back to Hyter, telling her about Frieren's deep care for others despite not always showing it. In the final exam, Syria arrives and states that she will personally proctor the final exam since Frieren's involvement caused more examinees to pass than intended, and decides to hold one-on-one interviews. Before the exam started, Frieren warns Fern that Syria will judge each candidate based on her own intuition, and that her intuition is always correct. And this is just me, but I actually don't feel like Syria's intuition is always correct. I think this is more so Frieren's humility speaking, Syria is probably twice Frieren's age, which is about 2,000 years old at this point, so I can see how hard it is to go up against a mage of that stature, even philosophically. Anyway, Syria flunks mostly everybody except for Dinkin, Method, Verbo, Lon, Ubel, and Fern. Dinkin, Verbo, and Ubel all demonstrate this combative, militaristic nature that align more with Syria's own philosophies on magic. Method and Lon each demonstrated sufficient resolve to qualify as a first-class mage. And Lon was particularly jaw-dropping because it's here that we find out that this man did the entire exam, all 3 phases, while having some damn tea and crumpets at a cafe on the other side of town. He was using his cloning spell the entire time. Honestly, I would have been pissed if Syria didn't pass that man off that alone. I actually now wish that I had that type of cloning power in this reality because the things I could get done with that ability. Neither here nor there. But I did appreciate the anime showing just how powerful cloning could get. We also learned that based on Frieren's intuition that Syria was going to flunk Frieren no matter what, but Syria was also going to pass Fern no matter what. Frieren also told Fern beforehand that Syria was going to offer an apprenticeship to Fern and emphasized that Fern was ready to make her own choice. So Syria does in fact flunk Frieren because Frieren, while powerful, wasn't naturally combative. Nor did she feel the need to try to convince Syria otherwise. She already knew she was going to flunk her, what was the point? Frieren did mention though that Flunk's flower spell was favorite despite Syria hating it, and it was the one that convinced Himmel to recruit Frieren. Syria does also end up passing Fern despite Fern rejecting her apprenticeship offer, because she noticed just how much potential Fern had after Fern commented on Syria's mana fluctuating like Frieren's mana. After Syria's exam, Frieren, Fern, and Stark meet up with some of the other mages at a bakery where Dinkin opens up more about his late wife, and Verbal actually explains his belief in helping strangers on a whim, inspired by none other than Himmel the hero. Verbal says that Himmel led by example and helped out many villages with minor and mundane tasks. We then see in a flashback Eisen asking Himmel what was the purpose of helping people with minor and trivial tasks, and Himmel responds that while these tasks won't save the world, he simply can't ignore anyone in need right in front of him. Afterwards, Fern and other mages who pass the exam head to Syria to obtain their first-class privileges. The receptionist at the association building explains that Syria banned Frieren from any mage association building for the next 1,000 years, because Syria is petty as hell. But while Stark and Frieren wait outside, Lernan approaches them and requests to duel Frieren so that he has a chance of being remembered in history as her killer, which is random as hell, but okay. Frieren refuses and tells Lernan that Syria remembers all her students, their personalities, and their favorite spells. Syria does this regardless of whether or not her students have made a mark on history, which Lernan takes to heart, which apparently that's all he needed was some validation, I guess. The next morning, Frieren, Fern, and Stark leave Oysters, bidding farewell to the city residents. Frieren asks Fern what spell she asked for, and she reveals that she asked for a spell to clean glows, which irritated the hell out of Syria. My words, not hers. On the bridge out of the city, Loin and Khan thank Frieren for helping them, and both parties bid farewell to each other. Fern remarked that it was a pretty fast goodbye. And we then see in a flashback that Himmel explains that he doesn't do tearful goodbyes because he believes he will cross paths again with people, and it will be embarrassing when they finally meet again. So that wraps up season 1 of Frieren. Like I said, I really did enjoy this anime, and it's been really cool to see people talking about it and enjoying it as well, especially around this year. And I think that's because it was new to a lot of people. I think it just like recently released on Netflix, or maybe it came up within the algorithm just this year. And it had this feeling of being something a bit different. I did want to make a brief comment on the anime awards. I know, if we're taking a nuanced look, solo leveling winning over Frieren seemed to be a matter of style as opposed to story so far. That is, if we're talking about the award criteria being anime only, no manga, no manhwa. Frieren was one season and more of an intro with a slow burn, with a lot of initial world building, while solo leveling focused more on power leveling and action in the first 2 seasons, as someone who's watched both and actually liked both. But it'll be interesting to see how much more we'll see in later seasons of Frieren, with season 2 being set for January 2026. Got a bit of a wait. This is especially because Frieren's goal isn't to defeat another Demon King overall, but to perhaps get some sense of closure with Himmel. But let me know your thoughts on Frieren in the comments below, and if there's any other anime you want me to cover. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like this video and subscribe to this channel. As far as what anime I'm covering next, I'm waffling between a retrospective of Attack on Titan, all 4 seasons, not one video, but splitting it up into about 4 to 5 videos, or talking about the anime Race, which I recently watched. I still want to actually read the manga to see the comparison since it was only like 1 season apparently. But again, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time.